Good evening and welcome to Primetime Lawmakers for February 16, 2011, the 15th legislative day of the 2011 session of the Georgia General Assembly. I'm Scott Slade. Coming up in tonight's program, Georgia's prisons are overflowing and state leaders announce plans to release some nonviolent offenders. Chief Justice Carol Hunstein delivers her State of the Judiciary address to a joint session of the General Assembly. We continue our leadership interview series tonight. House Speaker David Ralston joins us. And while we're on the theme of the judiciary, I'll be joined in studio by Lester Tate, President of the State Bar of Georgia. We'll be discussing funding issues in Georgia's court system. All that and more is coming up tonight on Primetime Lawmakers. But first, a call for prison reform comes from all three branches of state government. And Wandy Lawson is live at the state capitol with that story. Good evening, Wandy.
Well, Scott, it's not a lineup that you see every day. The Speaker of the House, the Lieutenant Governor, the Chief Justice of the State Supreme Court, and legislators from both parties united in a call to reduce the size of the state's prison system. Governor Nathan Deal says that the $1 billion price tag associated with having the fourth highest incarceration rate in the nation keeps Georgia from supporting its true budget priorities.
We now spend approximately $3,800 per year per K through 12 student. We spend approximately $6,300 per university system college student, but we spend approximately $18,000 per year for every inmate in our state prisons. That math simply does not work for Georgia.
I know that there will be a lot of questions about what ideas we're for or against. So let me be clear. If it leads to a safer society and a more effective way to protect our citizens, I am for it. If it weakens our justice system or harms the right of victims, I am against it.
For violent and repeat offenders, we will make you pay for your crimes. For other offenders who want to change their lives, we will provide you with the opportunity to do so. As a state, we cannot afford to have so many of our citizens waste their lives because of addiction.
To those who would say that this is being somehow soft on crime, let me say that this is exercising sensible and responsible leadership.
Representative Jay Neal today introduced House Bill 265, creating the Special Counsel on Criminal Justice Reform for Georgia. If that legislation is adopted, the Prison Reform Committee will consult with those who run the state's mental health courts, drug courts, family courts, and from those who work in the corrections field. They would then deliver their findings to the General Assembly by January 9th of 2012. Omar Howard says that he hopes they listen to people like him. After spending 14 years and 10 months in prison, he now serves as a prison chaplain and motivational speaker.
We need more programs to help guys as far as education. Just learn the basic things of learning how to balance a check, a bank book. So I think faith-based programs have to be one of the main priorities as far as rehabilitation.
Before making the announcement about the Criminal Justice Reform Council, Chief Justice Carol Hunstein delivered her second State of the Judiciary address to a joint session of the General Assembly. Making reference to a sentencing reform conference she attended in Alabama last year with Representative Wendell Willard.
Alabama is currently at 120% of prison capacity. Georgia is not far behind at 106%. The fact is, there are a lot of people in prison who are a greater threat to themselves than to society. Rather than lock up drug addicts and the mentally ill, we must reserve our prison beds for our most serious criminals, those who commit violent crimes, those who commit crimes against children. Many states, including Texas and South Carolina, have discovered they can keep the public safer and spend less money by supervising some nonviolent offenders outside of prison and treating the root causes of crime. Georgia's leaders in all three branches of government recognize that we can no longer afford the more than $1 billion it costs us annually to maintain the fourth highest incarceration rate in the nation. Today, 1 of every 13 Georgians is behind bars or on probation or parole. That is the highest rate in the nation under some kind of criminal justice restraint. Ladies and gentlemen, Georgia has proven we can be tough on crime with mandatory minimum sentences that allow no chance for parole. But I ask you, are we any safer, and at what cost? Unfortunately, there will always be those who commit crimes, but we cannot continue to build more prisons.
Justice Hunstein also said that specialty courts are providing cost savings and reducing the chances that offenders will return to jail.
A recent report by the Georgia Department of Audits found that drug courts in this state have resulted in lower sentencing costs and lower recidivism rates. The report found that drug courts cost up to 80% less than the average daily cost of other traditional sentencing options. More importantly, though, is their effectiveness in reducing crime and protecting the public safety. After 2 years, only 7% of drug court participants reoffend, compared to the 29% who reoffended after simply spending time in prison. They are people like Cornell Carradine. Mr. Carradine is a former Marine who today is 56 years old. While serving his country, he became addicted to alcohol, and later, he became addicted to cocaine. He spent the next 15 years in and out of jail, racking up 26 arrests for various crimes, mostly shoplifting and theft by taking, in order to pay for his $75 a day alcohol and drug dependency. His wife divorced him. In 2005, Mr. Carradine was diverted into DeKalb County's drug court under the leadership of recently retired Superior Court Judge Robert Castellani and Judge Cynthia Becker. Mr. Carradine graduated from drug court, and today he has 6 years of sobriety behind him. He has had no arrests, and he has been fully employed for 5 years, and he has remarried. Mr. Carradine, Judge Castellani, Judge Becker, would you please stand?
In other news this morning, a group representing Democrats and Republicans, as well as members of the Tea Party movement, was on the steps of the Capitol calling for stronger ethics laws. The Georgia Alliance for Ethics Reform wants to limit lobbyist gifts to $100 and hold transfers between political action committee accounts to no more than $10,000 per 2-year cycle. Angela Spears-Feltz said she became aware of lobbyist influence after she was elected to the Public Service Commission.
But while Georgians' personal economies are hurting, the economy of politics under this aptly gold dome seems to be flourishing. There appears to be no shortage of money for travel, entertainment, fancy meals, sporting events, concerts, you name it. There's money in this political economy for that, to wine and dine our legislators.
Another key tenet of our position is that we would like to restore the rulemaking authority of the State Ethics Commission, expand oversight to encompass public interest, and empower the Georgia Supreme Court to appoint all members of the State Ethics Commission rather than partisan political appointments.
Day 13 is not too late to get anything passed. If anybody tells you there's no time to deal with ethics legislation, well, that's just not true. The General Assembly has time to deal with any legislation that it wants to. There'll be several hundred bills passed this year. This could easily be one of them.
The group has not yet introduced legislation, but says it will do so in the coming days. In the House today, successful passage of a measure allowing those who train guide dogs and other helper animals to move freely at public and private school campuses and on the campuses of colleges and universities. House Bill 52 passed by a vote of 154 to 1. The House also agreed for the third time that a bitter chemical should be added to antifreeze to make it less attractive to animals and children.
We had 241 children that were poisoned in the state of Georgia by antifreeze. It is antifreeze that has ethylene glycol in it, smells sweet, tastes sweet, and therefore is attractive to small children, also attractive to animals, and it has been used to poison individuals. We have one that poisoned her husband and her boyfriend several years ago with antifreeze. I have a little vial down here with a little bit of antifreeze in it. That's how much it would take to do you in. That's all it would take.
House Bill 40 did pass 141 to 23. It moves to the Senate. Reporting live from the Capitol, I'm in Wandy Lawson for Primetime Lawmakers.
Yeah, Wandy, there's even been some famous murder cases involving antifreeze poisoning in Georgia, and Representative Benton saying 241 Georgia children poisoned by the substance. Is it like other household cleaners that children might accidentally ingest? Do most families even have remedies that can offset serious injury?
Well, actually, Scott, the antifreeze poisoning often looks a lot like food poisoning, so it can often be misdiagnosed even in the emergency room. And also, by the time sometimes families realize what's happened to the child, they may have already suffered irreparable internal injury. So that's some pretty scary stuff.
Well, it certainly is. Thanks very much, Wandy.
Thank you.
Earlier, we reported that legislation was introduced today to create a special counsel on justice reform in Georgia. In our leadership segment tonight, Wandy asked House Speaker David Ralston how he can assure that the work of this council will really lead to reform.
I think there's two keys to the work of the council. Number one is the commitment that the governor and the lieutenant governor and I and the chief justice have behind this whole need to reform the way we sentence people in our criminal justice system. So I think the level of commitment is critical. The second thing is the council gives us an opportunity to look at alternatives to incarceration, whether it's drug courts or mental health courts or community-based treatment and that sort of thing. So I think the commitment is there. I'm confident that we're going to have a good year of working on this issue, and that this council is going to bring back something that will be the basis for legislative action next year, because I think, as we said today, we can't wait any longer on this, because this is such a huge part of our state budget that we have to move on this.
You've certainly served in the General Assembly long enough to remember when the kind of tough on crime came in, the 3 strikes and you're out.
Right.
What has changed here in Georgia as you see it that kind of allows this to come in?
Well, I think we now know that some of the reforms that we did, particularly back in the 90s, probably swept with too large a broom, maybe, that came with a great price tag. The 90s were a completely different time financially in state government. We now know that the cost of those programs and the cost of those sentencing changes is exorbitant, and I think that it probably was a higher number than probably we estimated at the time, and now we're having to really focus on what our priorities are in state government. And really ask ourselves who needs to be incarcerated and who can better be rehabilitated out in the community.
There was a group here this morning, switching gears a little bit. They're calling themselves the Georgia Alliance for Ethics Reform, a conglomeration of groups, and they were here calling for some legislation that would, one, cap the amount that legislators can receive as far as gifts, and also look at some stronger reporting standards. You obviously have received some criticism for your trip that you took to Europe with your family, and I'm wondering, do you feel that there is a need to strengthen some of these ethics laws, and what is kind of the benefit of having legislators be able to interact with the business community in the way that they can currently?
Well, I think there is a benefit. There is a benefit in having the ability to look at new ways of doing things that can enhance economic development, for example. We passed a very strong ethics reform package last session. It only went into effect about a month ago. I believe that we ought to give that new law time to work, and let's see how far. Let's kind of take a look at it and watch it operate before we start talking about changing it again. But here's the real key. I believe that the people of Georgia, the voters of Georgia, have the good judgment and the intelligence to make decisions about caps. I don't think government ought to be doing that, frankly. And because of what we did last year and what the changes that we've made to our ethics laws in the last 3 or 4 or 5 years here in Georgia, every Georgian is a mouse click away from knowing every nickel that's spent on me or any other member of the General Assembly. So I think with that kind of information out there, I think Georgians are equipped to make good judgments, and so I'm going to trust their judgment.
So are you suggesting that by checking on those things, they would make their decisions at election time?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Another issue that, of course, is getting people talking, at least outside of the Gold Dome, is Sunday sales. Everyone wondering what's going to happen with that. It looked like it was moving at a pretty good clip. Now maybe slowing down a little bit. What do you want to see happen this year as far as Sunday sales of alcohol?
Well, you know, that's really not about Sunday sales. It's more about local control and about whether the people at the local level ought to have a right to weigh in on issues such as the package sales of alcoholic beverages on Sundays in their community. If that measure were to be passed here this year, it wouldn't make available one drop of alcohol anywhere in Georgia until there had been a local referendum in a community that chose to vote on it. Communities don't have to vote on it. It's been around a while. It's been around, as you know, for 3, 4, 5 years. I'm not taking a position on the measure. It just may be one of those measures that we just need to let the members vote on so we can move on to the next issue.
And speaking of which, it seemed like we got off to kind of a slow clip as far as the legislative session, obviously with the snow as the beginning of the actual session, but also a little bit less legislation making its way through than usual. What are some of the priorities that actually have to happen? Obviously the budget, but beyond that, what has to happen this year?
I think the slow clip's good. I've been an advocate since I've been speaker that we need to do, instead of trying to pass hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of new laws every year, that what we ought to do is focus on a few things and do them right. I don't sense a great outcry from Georgians for us to pass all these new laws. So I kind of like the slower clip, actually. When we're going at a slower clip, we're focusing more on what it is that we have to do. Here's what we have to do this session. We have to balance the budget. That's the one thing that the law mandates that we do, pass a balanced budget. We don't have the luxury of doing what they do in Washington by printing money and spending us into debt. So we're going to pass a balanced budget like we did last year. That's a challenge in this kind of climate, in the current economic climate that we're in. It's a real challenge, but we're going to get it done. The other thing we have to do this session is preserve and keep intact the Hope Scholarship Program. And we're going to do that. We're going to make whatever necessary adjustments we have to make so that future generations of Georgia's best and brightest young people will have the promise of hope out there to reward outstanding academic work. So there are a few other things that we're going to look at, but we're really looking at things now from this perspective. What makes Georgia more competitive economically? I don't think there is anything we can do more important than to make Georgia as competitive as we possibly can in terms of our tax policy, in terms of economic development, so that we can bring jobs here and put Georgians back to work. And so we're looking through that filter at everything that we do this session.
All right. Well, Mr. Speaker, always appreciate your insights here on Primetime Lawmakers. Thank
Always
you.
great to visit with you. Thank you.
In fact, we'll continue our conversation with Speaker Ralston tomorrow evening. We'll talk about illegal immigration and other substantive issues. Speaker David Ralston represents Blue Ridge, Georgia. This is his second term as House Speaker. There's more to come tonight on Primetime Lawmakers. Is it time to start locking up fewer people? After this short break, we'll analyze judicial funding with Lester Tate, president of the State Bar of Georgia. So stay with us.
Watch GPB Sports Central with me, Gil Tyree.
I'm Mark Harmon.
I'm Nikki Noto.
And I'm John.
GPB Sports. Sorry.
Nikki Noto.
And I'm John.
GPB Sports Shoot.
Dude.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Too soon.
I'm Nikki Noto.
GPB Sports Central. My bad.
And I'm John.
GPB Sports. So close.
Not even close.
Seemed close.
And I'm John Nell.
GPB Sports Central, the leader in high school sports.
Next time on Pioneers of Television.
Let me close my eyes and just...
It was a live show. Anything really could happen.
Every little inflection that you have is exactly the way I work.
And what do you do for exercise?
I stumble and then I fall into a coma.
May I?
Welcome back to Primetime Lawmakers. In her remarks this morning, Chief Justice Carol Hunstein mentioned the problem of continued budget cuts having on Georgia's courts, even as caseloads have increased exponentially. The problem goes much deeper than mere staff reductions. Chief Justice Hunstein warned of having to let defendants go free because of lack of resources for trials. She cited a recent study by the Washington Economics Group, which found that in addition to public safety concerns, Georgia's underfunded courts hurt the state financially in business expansion and job growth area. To talk about the details of that report, I'm joined live on set by Lester Tate, President of the State Bar of Georgia. Appreciate you being here this evening.
Thank you for having me tonight, Scott. It's a pleasure being here.
We're going to have a great discussion, and let's start our discussion this evening. Take a look at that clip from Chief Justice Hunstein from this morning.
Sure.
Let me be clear about the tipping point. Our state and U.S. constitutions guarantee criminal defendants the right to a speedy trial. That means that if there are not enough judges to clear the backlog, people charged with some of the most heinous crimes will walk free, not by judicial discretion, but as a matter of law. We cannot in Georgia allow that to happen. Under the constitutions of our state and nation, we must protect defendants' constitutional rights. But in a democratic society, we cannot allow a lack of resources to threaten the public safety. Backlogs and delays also add to the cost of doing business in Georgia. A recent study by the Georgia Economics Group of Georgia's courts shows just how dire the effects of underfunded courts are on our economy. The study concluded that delays in resolving civil cases due to budget cuts have had an adverse impact on business proceedings throughout Georgia and affect this state's ability to create and retain jobs and to attract and expand industries.
Many viewers might be stunned at the prospect of letting criminal defendants go without a trial. Mr. Tate, is that a real possibility here?
It's a very real possibility. In fact, in the last several months, we have seen several cases that were speedy trial cases. If you're a defendant in a criminal case in the state of Georgia, you have not only a constitutional right under our federal and state constitution to a speedy trial, but you also have a statutory right. And several of those cases have already made their way to the Supreme Court. So it's a very real possibility, but it's also very easily alleviated because when you look, for example, the state budget, and a lot of this also involves counties that fund the courts because for the trial courts there's county funding. But on the state level, and we're talking about the state budget tonight, it's less than 1%, about 0.86%. Of our $18 billion budget actually goes to the judiciary. So,
but we're spending $1 billion to lock people up every year.
We're spending $1 billion to lock people up. And I think today you saw one of the greatest sort of bipartisan shows of support, people that cut across all lines coming together to say this is something that we need to look at and see if we're doing a good job and we're spending our money wisely here.
Yeah, that was quite a scene. The Speaker, Lieutenant Governor, the Governor, the Chief Justice, members of both parties, legislative leadership all together saying that we need to do something. Do we get at judicial reform by looking at how we're spending our money on the judiciary or on criminal justice?
I think you do. There has to be some motivating factor, I think, for just about any legislative initiative that's undertaken. And certainly the funding crisis that we've had as a result of the recession is something that's brought this issue to the forefront. If you look at the Department of Corrections budget as compared to the judicial budget, the Department of Corrections budget's almost 6%. So it's still not huge, but it's about $1 billion a year. Compare that back to 0.86% of the actual court budget. And so if you're looking for savings, you're going to be able to find more there than you are someplace else.
So when you get right down to it, really, when you write these tough on crime laws, you're writing checks that the judicial system is having trouble cashing when you get right down to it.
I think that's absolutely true. You know, incarceration may be a luxury that we as a state can no longer afford. And of course, one of the real problems with that, and one of the reasons that I think it's brought to the forefront, is the financial thing. But when you look at the number of people from different backgrounds that are involved in it, I think there's actually a real chance of taking a look at it. Because the real danger, it takes a lot of political courage on behalf of our governor.
Sure does.
It takes a lot of political courage on behalf of our Chief Justice, because that's also an elected position. But once you start the ball rolling forward, if you've got everybody on board to look at it and you can get consensus agreement about it to move it through, you're not looking at one side having a 30-second soundbite that they can say, Scott Slade shouldn't be elected governor because he let rapists and murderers go free. You've got everybody signed on, everybody's part of it, everybody's willing to take responsibility for it.
Let's dig into some of the numbers that really do flesh this story out, particularly where Georgia ranks in the rest of the country in the number of people that we incarcerate. I mean,
right.
We do a good job at that. We lock up a lot of people.
And there have been a lot of campaign ads saying 3 strikes, you're out, mandatory minimum sentence, and really and truly that invades the province of really what courts are all about. What courts are supposed to do, unlike the legislature, which passes broad laws that apply to all citizens. When you talk about the courts, they're supposed to look at individual circumstances. We elect our judges here in Georgia, and so shouldn't we enable them to do that? But in many cases, it's been politically popular not to do that. That's why we have 1 in 13 Georgians that are currently in prison or under correction supervision. That'd be probation, supervised release, parole.
1 in 13.
1 in 13. Nationwide, that figure's about 1 in 31. So you see a stark difference there. Governor Deal referred earlier, and I think Chief Justice Hunstein in her speech, that we rank 4th throughout the nation in the number of people that we have incarcerated, but yet we're 10th in population.
That's quite amazing. And we also, I love the figures that the governor actually brought up today. For every dollar we spend on education, we're spending 50 cents on the penal system. What does this do to jobs?
I think it does a lot for jobs, and it does a lot for public safety. You know, a lot of people say you get out of prison and, you know, they're not any smarter. Well, that's because they went to prison, not Princeton. And so, you know, being able to keep people from going back to prison, they're not, if they're learning anything in there, it's not anything that's good for society. When you look at people that want to come relocate to Georgia, you look at large companies, what they want is a place that their executives and their people that are going to move in, it's going to be good education, water, all those things that we talked about in the gubernatorial campaign, but you also want a workforce and you want an educated workforce. And with the system that we have right now, it doesn't appear that we're putting our best foot forward.
Let's take a look at a quick graph real quick to show you the difference in the caseload and the court's budgets. As you can see, it's sort of an inverse. The more people we run through the system, the worse things get. Do we need more judges, Mr. Tate? I mean, is that really what it's going to take really to start moving this thing along? Is that where the money ought to be spent first?
In large respects, yes. We had instances several years ago where we used to use senior judges, and what senior judges were judges who had reached retirement age. They had been elected judges for many, many years. They would take senior status, which meant that they could be employed throughout the state to fill in and to make sure that the workload was being filled. What happened was we had several high-profile cases, one of which involved the shooting down at the Fulton County Courthouse, where you had unelected judges, these senior judges that had been for many years but had now been appointed. And so you had legislation that was introduced, much of which passed, that reduced funding and limited the use of those senior judges.
In the few seconds we have left, I'm sorry, I just want to move this along.
Best resource we have, though, the senior judges. You're not paying more retirement, you're not paying staff, you're just paying the judge.
So in a few seconds, what we need to look at sentencing, we need to look at funding the judiciary to break open the clock.
We do, and our report said that it had between 3,500 and 7,000 jobs have been lost just because we have slow courts. That's a standard economic formula from a company that does this everywhere. So it also means not just justice, but jobs.
Please come back and talk about this some more.
I would love to.
It's an issue that is right in front of us now. It looks like something's going to be done with the kind of folks that are looking at working on this. That is the time we have for this evening. Thank you for joining us. Coming up tomorrow on Lawmakers, we'll bring you another installment on our leadership interview series with House Minority Caucus Chairman Representative Brian Thomas, scheduled to appear, plus in-depth analysis on important legislative issues and the latest Capitol news tomorrow night here at 7. If you'd like to see a repeat of this broadcast, Primetime Lawmakers can be seen at 5:30 tomorrow morning at GPB. Coming up next, the best high school sports show, bar none, a new episode of GPB Sports Central. So stay tuned for that. That's our broadcast for the 15th legislative day of the 2011 session. Thanks to our guests for joining us tonight. For Wandi Lawson and the whole Primetime Lawmakers team, I'm Scott Slade. Have a great night.
This is a GPB original production.